Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us live. This is the Office POV. It's 2022, so welcome. This is our amazing group of roundtable participants. So thank you guys all for being here. And thank you to our amazing partner, VergeSense, for making this session happen and making sure we can live stream to all of you from wherever you are. So with that being said, we are going to start by just doing some quick intros and then we'll jump right into the conversation. So Rudy, why don't you kick us off?
Hi, Rudy Reagan. I'm with Deutsche Bank and I'm on the IT side of the house. I'm the global program lead for our IT programs.
Cool.
Hi, I'm Amanda Langwall. I'm a licensed architect and a studio director at Gensler in New York.
Hi, Dejana Chappelle, a principal at EY, and I lead our workplace strategy practice.
Michael Davidson. I've been doing global workplace strategy for 30 years for Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and JP Morgan Chase.
Hey, Justin Stewart, president and co-founder of Industrious, a nationwide and global co-working company. Happy to be here.
Hi everyone, Fernanda Bello. I head workplace strategy and insights for VergeSense.
And my name is Mariela Brahimi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Disrupt CRE. So with that, we've had so much conversation about workplace strategy. We've had exhausting conversations about return to office. We have a push on talent acquisition and retention. So understanding the state of office in 2022 is paramount, and that is what we're all doing here. You guys all have a different perspective and a different take. You have your hands in different aspects of this industry. So we want to talk about major shifts in company strategy and culture at large, because people have changed, and therefore the way we work, what we need at work has changed. What we need out of buildings has changed. So what are some of the major industry shifts that you guys have seen from pre-pandemic to right now, just a couple years later?
Well, I'd say one is the status quo change and thinking about occupancy in space. And I think a lot of our clients and a lot of the research says and shows us that even pre-pandemic, a good day was 60% occupancy on average, right? Something along those lines. And we were planning space to support that, and we were sort of over-provisioning space, I think, generally. But now, given the pandemic, I had a conversation just last week with a CFO who said, we've invested in our headquarters space and we're only 8% on a good day, 5%, 8% occupied on a good day. So I think it's really more enlightened. Our clients are more enlightened these days to say, this data matters, and what are we going to do with this data? And we really need to sort of readjust our approach to space and the provisioning of space. I think it's definitely one thing that's come to pass.
Very well said. I think the past 3 years has been a period of great change, but I also think that there have been changes in the works for the last 15 years that were accelerated for the past 3 years. And I think that people were behaving differently, people were working differently, people were living differently. And I think what has changed today is that the heads of companies have actually had to look at that in the bright light of day and reconcile it and figure out, how do I embrace this? How do I run the company? What do I need to manage this workforce more productively and allow people the freedom that they deserve and need to live their lives fully? So I think there's a period of change and great transformation, but there's also dynamics that have been in the works for quite some time for those of us that are practitioners of real estate.
Go ahead. One thing that I think, to the point before the pandemic, we were looking at, agile seating and various different ways of setting up workplace to support different work styles. And I think because of the pandemic, we've had to embrace that a lot quicker, I think, to your point. I think there's also been a bit of a paralysis around the last couple of years. We've returned to office how many times already? Some of us at least. And so I think companies are really also looking for data that backs up and really kind of has the answer, the magic answer that I think we're all looking for. And I think we're finally at the point where people are like, okay, we just need to go back, we need to pilot, we need to test out things, we need to try new things and allow employees to actually tell us how they're most productive working, how they want to work. They really need to be listening to the voice of employees a lot more, because without it, you're not going to get the data, and without the data, you're not going to know how to move forward. So it's that cyclical nature of it that we really need to just embrace and sort of run with that pattern.
Yeah, and I think just to add to what Amanda said, one thing I observe a lot as part of workplace strategy and talking to clients of WordSense too is the whole approach of the workplace has changed, right? So basically, before the pandemic, there were a number of assumptions that we did when we did workplace strategy that they were pretty consistent. They happen all the time. So we knew work happened at an office, at a physical space. We had a good idea of like how many different work types, what activities are performed in each one of them. And we knew that people's decision of coming to the office, they were pretty consistent too. Like regardless of flexibility in the past, basically people would come a couple of days a week, they would work from home 1 or 2 days. It's fine, but there was still the certainty that people would come. Now what we are dealing with is the at the moment decisions. Like people plan to come to the office, but their life changes, and they have like in the moment decisions of maybe not, I'm not going to the office tomorrow. Maybe I'm doing this work virtually. So that is all this in the moment decisions, which it makes it very, very hard to predict what you're gonna get tomorrow or the next week in the office. So unpredictability is here to stay. That's what we are seeing here.
And from a data strategy standpoint, this kind of leads into the next question, but I see you have something to add, so before I move on.
Well, I have to start with an obligatory statement that any opinions I express do not represent Deutsche Bank, and they are my own opinions. In your write-up about this session, you had mentioned that people changed, and I have a very different opinion. I think people traditionally have worked from home throughout human history. If we look at the history before cities grew up, people were farmers, we had agrarian cultures, and people worked from home. Shopkeepers lived over their shops. People didn't have the commutes. We live in a very connected world now, but the pandemic forced people to experience that previous lifestyle where we had more a sense of community. And so I think people are kind of returning to the roots, and it's just really human nature. I think despite what we do, we're not going to have the same numbers of people coming back to the office. So I don't think it's something new. I think it's actually something very old. Something
that's kind of rooted in us as humans. I think whether it's because we're going back to our roots as humans, or we are maybe working from home for the very first time, and it is a new experience, it has changed our expectations, right? And so I think what's happening is there's a lot of assumptions that are being made about human behavior in a return to work strategy. And so those assumptions are dangerous. And so in order to mitigate assumptions about human behavior, we have to start using data and technology. And what I have had the pleasure of learning from Fernanda, which we met when she was back in Spotify, now with VergeSense, and she has this kind of end-to-end perspective, is that the nature of technology has accelerated significantly in the last few years, just like people have changed and workplace strategy has evolved. So in order to use data as the basis for making these choices, it has to be a level of understanding that the technology has to do versus just seeing like it has traditionally. So my question is, you guys all see technology from a different standpoint. Not all of you have your hand in that door, but how can technology help us kind of understand? What have you seen be successful or maybe challenging even still to understand human behavior and make real choices proactively, predictions, identify patterns?
Yeah, on that note, I mean, I think it breaks down into two areas. One is the actual tool sets for telecommunications, audiovisual. A lot of companies are still catching up on that. Daily you see changes between Skype and Teams and Zoom.
We had this the other day.
Yeah, and problems connecting them all. So that has to be straightened out. That has to get better. But there's another side of it too, and that is people want, or management wants people back in the office for productivity. And how are we measuring productivity? I don't think there are most companies do not have tool sets that can gauge productivity and compare remote workers to office workers. I mean, I speak personally, I am much more productive when I'm working from home. I don't have distractions, I don't have people to communicate with, and I am, as I said, I'm IT. In the industry now, there's the expression, why commute to compute? And there's really very little reason for it. Most of my work is done online. So do I need to come into the office and do what I can do more efficiently at home?
Right. But you've been also working from home for quite a while. You've had this flexible model personally for a while, which we've connected on, and that made a lot of sense for you just in life.
Deutsche Bank in general, because we lost our main offices in 9/11, we're very proactive about remote communications. We had a very mature technologies going into the pandemic.
Beautiful. So it was a pretty seamless transition for you guys.
There's another, I guess, maybe sidebar that sort of answers your question, but that I want to mention because this is a conversation I just had the other day. There's the element of the analog that I think is still really key to what we do and how we can be productive.
Yeah.
And I won't say what company this is due to privacy, but they outfitted their conference rooms and colorful, great seating, but the walls were sort of dark purple and dark black, which is great if you're in person and it's kind of cool and it's kind of hip. But when you write on the whiteboard, which was glass, and you write with fluorescent markers, and you think about at the end of your meeting, you've had 3 hours of just great brainstorming, great information, and it's all captured on this whiteboard. You go to take a picture, and you're like, oh wait, the picture doesn't even pick up the writing.
Yeah.
So, and there's no way for this. It's not a smart board, so it can't just send it to me. So things that are that simple that, that we shouldn't lose touch of those things as well, like the beauty of everyone being in a room, writing ideas down, collaborating. And, it's not a technologically advanced thing at all. It's very basic, actually, but not being able to capture it in that sense is a failure, in my opinion.
And to Rudy's point, a lot of things haven't changed. And a lot of things don't need to necessarily change, right? We don't need change just for the sake of it, but we do have a lot that we can help us take the guesswork out of decision making in the day-to-day.
Going fast and slow. Humans need both. I think the many tools that have been delivered in this word we call technology, there are so many, and it's no different than a carpenter. Not every carpenter or plumber is created equal. Some are masters. Some are artisans because they know when to use their tools, how to use them, and when to put them away when you actually don't need them. And so I think with technology and the many workplace tools and the personal tools and social media, we've seen the tremendous benefits, and we've seen the dark side of using them too much in our personal relationships, in our professional relationships, in leaning too much on technology. And going back to the more anthropological point that Rudy made, there's one thing that humans have in common. They always have and they always will. Every single human being, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, came into the earth the same way. And we were all born as babies, and those babies needed human touch. And those babies didn't have a language that came out with them. And so when it comes to human connectivity, contact, physical presence, these things are like our primary operating language. So when you put technology in the middle of that, this is why people get lonely, even if they have all the tools of technology at their disposal. And so I think, the other thing that humans are not great at, they're not great at living in the gray, the middle of things. They want to be at one extreme or the other, and it just doesn't work. And so I think those of us that do what we do, these are the lives we lead because we study this stuff, we think about this stuff every day, every night. I think it's trying to bring our organizations to the middle ground, which is much healthier and more balanced for the companies and the people themselves.
And I want to have Fernanda answer this question because she's really the expert in the room. but I have always kind of continued to hear this throughout the Disrupt CRE conferences over the years, that like the best technology is this technology that you don't even notice is there. And I know that's what you guys do, and it's so powerful. And so I want to hear, how can we take the guesswork out of some of the decision making where there's so much natural unknown that we can't possibly understand? And some of it is moving forward regardless of that unknown. And for the clients that want to play the wait and see game, and we're going to talk more about that too, but talk to us about how we can.
Yeah, I think I want to start with like remembering my background and my experience with transforming workplaces, right? So you go from point A to point B, you're trying to achieve certain goals. And this concept of like workplace experience is an up and coming term that now is coming more and more to everybody's mouth. But it's been ingrained on me like since day one I started in this industry. Workplace experience to me is when you build a space that really performs to what people need to do, right? So it's like that seamless experience. Somebody walks in, they really feel the company culture, they really feel the best of that space. The space offers all the tools and technology that people need to perform their job. Like they're coming to perform their job. In the end of the day, they just want to deliver. They just want to do what they're supposed to do with the company. So for me, the perfect workplace is the one that works, right? So the one that people swipe their badge, people come in, it just works. Like coffee is there, it's warm. I'll give Justin an industrial example. Like my experience last night in the cocktail party was great because everything was there, right? So I had a place to sit, I had a place to mingle, I had a place to grab my drinks at. The bathroom was right there. So for me, that's the experience right there, right? So that's what people want to have. And I think technology is kind of tricky because you don't want to create more work to people. You don't want to deploy something that is going to create more work to people so your space can perform. No, people need to perform, space needs to perform. There are two performance KPIs right there. And it's very, very important that whatever technology you bring in, it's totally agnostic to the people's day in the life in that space. I think that's the mantra for me. Like that's how you achieve workplace experience, and experiences are created by design. Amanda can go in that route too. I'm a big fan of architects' work for that, experiential design and all that stuff. But technology needs to be that thing sitting in the building. I was going to say like nobody knows about it. We don't know. We don't want people to know about it because it's right there. It doesn't interfere or impact in people's performance. It just measures the performance of the space. Just measure the performance of the building and how the building is performing against the users that need to utilize that.
100%. And that wonderful testimony you gave of the cocktail party, we'll say thank you to Justin for hosting us in his beautiful industrial space, which did just that for us.
Exactly.
And it was just taking care of our simple needs as humans. Everything was there. It was available. We were able to just hang out and have a great time. Technology is no different.
And I think like the other challenge with technology is adoption. Everybody knows that, right? Because like when smartphones came in, I couldn't get my grandma to use a smartphone until today, right? So smartphones came in like 20 years ago or 15 years ago. So adoption is really key because like you said, Mario, and I think Mike touched on that too, we're humans, we're all different. And that's the beauty of our diversity, to really think differently and to have like a different lifestyle and everything. And some people will love the technology, like Ruth said, and some people won't. So it's really hard to get the adoption there.
Well, I think whether we want technology, whether we don't, whether we want to feel more human and strip some of that away, data is a huge part of our workplace strategy. It just is. We're in commercial real estate. We need to have an understanding. We play with too big of assets, too much of capital investment, and we contribute too much to the environment to be messing around without having data. So fact of the matter is, we're here, it's 2022. We need to have a data ecosystem. So I want to touch on the data ecosystem. Did you have something you wanted to add before we get into it?
And I think it ties to this. So
perfect.
The one thing I was going to add as a starting point is that I think the difference between, before the pandemic where people were committed to either working at home or working in the office, and it was less of this hybrid model. And so right now I think that's something new that we're dealing with, and it's a hybrid model that is very unpredictable. And so I think from a starting point, I think twofold, first before even, on the real estate side, before the space is occupied, before the people are there, before you're dealing with workplace experience, you have to figure out portfolio-wide, how do you know how much real estate to take, and what is that distribution of spaces within the real estate? And so, we've, in my office, have been working very closely. We have got a whole intelligent places practice that is looking at real estate portfolios for companies and leveraging mathematics, basically. We're trying to actually dive deeper into not just headcount and saying you've got X number of people times Y square foot and you need 1 million square feet of space. That was before. That was the simple way of doing it. So we're diving in really to understanding the individual roles of the people, understanding things like prior and current badge swipe data, all of that, looking at it from a much more holistic point of view. That's something way above my own pay grade. It's complex math that our team is really trying to put some backup to it to give clients a little bit more confidence going forward about the real estate they're taking on. And then once people are in the space with this more hybrid model, and I think the notion of technology does play a big part of that in terms of software to reserve desks if it's unassigned, a little bit more concierge kind of model of being able to leverage and understand where the tools are in the office via technology or more analog. But then also a big thing that we're doing lately is studying around hybrid meeting spaces. Again, a lot of times, and this is a prime example, we're all here in person, everyone else is home or at their office. It's a very different experience, especially obviously we've got hopefully a lot of people on the line, but when you're really trying to collaborate across the screen, when you've got people in person, we spent a year or two where everyone was home and they were the nice little picture on their computer screen, and now you've got a lot more people in the room you're dealing with. And to build on that whiteboard example, if you've got people in a room and they're collaborating over a whiteboard, can the camera even see and read what's on that whiteboard? So dealing with stuff like that is entirely new to what we're dealing with these days.
And I think, Amanda, to your point, I think that issue always existed in the past, right? So let's be real here. You've always had people sitting in different countries. Like with the globalization, reality is you were working with teams across like the ocean. That always existed before. I think now there is a little bit of more attention to workplace equitability. How do we provide and foster inclusion to everybody regardless of their work mode? Like if they're working in an office, if they're working remotely, if they're working from anywhere, how do you make everybody feel they're part of the conversation? And that always has been the struggle. Like I remember my past experiences working with projects in China and in different countries. Like it's not only the language barrier, but also like the physical space barrier and all of those things. So now that is thankfully more attention to how do we use technology to foster that, to bridge that gap, and really make everybody to feel they're in the same spot.
So we're gonna, sorry, please go ahead.
Okay. Just one thing to touch on, Fernando, what you said earlier about a workplace experience is about a workplace that works, right? And I think we all represent 7 different organizations here. And I think the key is that one size doesn't fit all. I think we'd all agree with that. And so I think there's an element of diligence that's required to really understand who is your workforce, geographies, like what are those sort of regional influences, what are the different functions of work, how often sort of thinking about the hybrid model and things like that, and really defining what those are early on before starting to make strategic investments, before starting to even invest in technology, because like what you need to understand and to sort of determine what are we going to measure in the first place before we sort of invest in technology and sort of go down that path. And then going to the technology ecosystem piece, or the data ecosystem, we as real estate, corporate real estate, commercial real estate practitioners can't own the entire process, right? We own a piece of it. We are supplementing the sort of larger collective viewpoint. And so I think we need to be able to leverage HR data, sentiment, employee sentiment data, satisfaction data, things like that, and obviously work with technologists and work with our technology team to sort of bring forward a collective solution. So I think sometimes where I see clients fall short is that you are trying to own it. Someone owns it within the organization without sort of the cross collaboration that's required for a full solution.
I mean, traditionally, this is how we are in commercial real estate, right? We want to have all of our data. We, don't want to share. But what I think becomes challenging, even just from a connecting with HR standpoint and trying to get into this more human element and see if people are happy and what amenities they want. I think there is a major difference, although that is so important and we are seeing and doing that a lot more because we have to. I think that there's a major difference between what people say they want and what actually happens and what actually amenities get used. I mean, I know in multifamily, 9 out of 10 people want a gym in the building. How many of those people actually, when they move in and are living there, are using that gym? So I think when we talk about, needs and talking to people and seeing how they feel, of course, I'm so glad that that's happening more. We need that. We need to be checking in with each other because feelings are important, and it determines, feelings amongst coworkers and colleagues and how you feel in the space is so important. But we also need to measure exactly what's happening so that we can make smart decisions moving forward, and technology allows us to do that today, and that's a beautiful thing. Does anybody else want to touch on the data ecosystem?
Just on the note of people thinking they know what they want, when we had the return to office, there was a lot of concern from the business organizations, and they said, because we had been reducing space for some time, and a lot of the business organizations said, well, what if everybody comes back at once? We don't have seats for them. So at the time, we did not have a desk reservation system. We didn't want people to reserve desks for weeks at a time. So we had a system for claiming a desk, and on your commute in, or you could check beforehand to make sure you had a desk in the office. Because the business organizations were pushing for it, we very quickly rolled out a desk reservation system. And we found that when people returned to the office, initially people were using it, and then they found that, well, there was really no competition for desks.
Exactly.
And everyone stopped using it. So it gets, when we go into a new facility or we have a return to work or return to office in a particular location, you'll see some initial use and then it falls off again.
Right.
So really the technology has to be tailored to use. And we are in a time of change.
We are.
It's change upon change upon change. So anything we decide today, you have to make sure it is somewhat modular and you can modify it.
Change is the only constant. Who said that? Somebody said that. Who said that? I'm going to put that on a t-shirt.
Can I also add, one thing that I'm starting to see emerge right now, which is actually really interesting, to the point where companies were panicked of we need enough seats for every single person to have a desk, and it was that approach. And I was working with one client who was actually subleasing more space because they grew over the course of the pandemic, and they didn't have enough seats. They had promised their employees everyone gets a desk when they came back, and then a few months beyond that, they realized, wait a second, half these seats are sitting empty. Why are we getting more seats for this? And so we're having conversations with them right now that maybe there's actually, what are the drivers that bring people back to the office? And maybe to the one size fits all model, that's out the window, and we need to tailor it. And so giving the employees the ability to say, I'm going to come in 3 days or 1 day, but they get different offerings. So for the people that sign up to come in 3 or 4 or even 5 days a week, they get an assigned space. They get a place where they can do heads down work that is theirs. But if you're only coming in 1 day, maybe you get a different type of desk or a different type of space. And for those that are more staying remote, they don't get assigned anything. And it's sort of you have to find the space. There's a variety of different seating styles, and when you get there, you go and find one of those. But it gives, again, that flexibility built in so that you're not committing to a specific kind of model. It's sort of like a membership club, or probably what co-working kind of models do, where you can sign up for varying levels of amenity access for your employees, but let them kind of pick and choose how they want to work.
Speaking of flexibility, I do want to hear from Justin. Talk to us about how it's going. I mean, I really want to get into this hybrid work strategy conversation, because I think it's kind of that gray area, and it's where we shouldn't really be living. We're not really totally sure how it works. Everybody has a different definition. But what are you seeing from how people want to use space these days?
Yeah. Well, first off, I feel like I was at my wife's family's dinner party where I rarely get to say anything. But listen, this is obviously a shift in the way people are working. I think the pandemic really provided a resource for the employees to actually have a voice. So now the employees are saying, I don't want to come back to the office. And now the boss really kind of has no idea what to do. Who do I listen to? Do I force them? Do I let them make their decisions? So really this whole hub and spoke model is a real thing, but what's really actually happening is that people are working from their home 1 day, 2 days a week. But a majority of these people are thriving to be in a social setting. They need to be out there at least 1, 2, 3 days a week. I'm seeing it even with my most introverted employees, or people who do not really respond well to interaction. They still come to the office on Wednesdays when we have lunches for everyone. People do want to see people. Mm-hmm. But the most interesting thing of all is these large companies, for instance, Coca-Cola. If you wanted to work for Coca-Cola before the pandemic, you needed to move your life, your family, to move to Atlanta, Georgia. Mm-hmm. Now the Coca-Colas of the world are saying, you know what, I can find bright, smart people in Nashville or in Austin and Raleigh and Detroit, and a lot of these large companies are no longer saying, you know what, this is no longer our HQ. We might still keep a HQ presence, but we are now having people work 40 people here, 30 people here, 20 people here. So for our model, for the co-working model, it's perfect because these large companies are no longer saying, you know what, I need to sign a 10-year lease, I need to have people, I need to build out a space that's going to cost millions of dollars. I'm going to outsource what it feels like to go to work for my employees. Who is that outsource provider to do that for us? Is it Industrious? Is it another company? That's really kind of what we're seeing on a larger scale.
And Justine, I'm so glad you touched base on that because I was having conversations last night about you guys have shared with us, with me, that according to the data, the occupancy of your spaces has been increasing over time after the pandemic. And I think just to do a parallel with data, we are talking about technology here and data, so I think we've recently published our State of Workplace report. That's something we do in VergeSense, kind of like collecting all the data that we have with our clients and doing a parallel between the industry and seeing what's going on with the space. And funny enough, we've seen a tremendous increase of collaboration areas utilization compared to the pre-pandemic world. In the pre-pandemic world, that was pretty steady, like the occupancy of collaboration zones within the office. And what we are looking now is, there is an uptick of collaboration now, which tells me, the data tells a story. That's how I see data in my end too. And the story that probably the data is telling me is, people are coming with a different purpose to the office, right? So they're not coming with the same intention before that they did the pandemic. Like before pandemic, they came with one intention. Now they're probably coming for a different purpose. And I think the conversation with Justine last night was, maybe that's why you guys are doing so great, because the purpose today is mostly collaboration. It's mostly socializing, because the heads down work and the focus work, they can definitely do from home, like Ruth said, right? So people are very productive at home. For the last 2.5 years, we've been delivering consistently and strongly during a global pandemic. Like that's the result right there. So the purpose of the workplace has changed. And we are seeing that, and I think just bringing to the data reality, we have seen throughout our report, for the audience that is virtual, it's available at vergesense.com. You can go there, anybody, it's free, you can download and have a look at it. But when you see the numbers right there, it really tells you the story that people are coming back to collaborate. People are not coming back to focus and heads down and do computer work, right?
I think that just makes sense.
And just to piggyback quickly on that, and we haven't talked much about this yet, but I think the second part, or the other side of the coin, is that the home environments have changed. The home offices have changed. I have 3 screens. One of my colleagues was telling me yesterday he has 4 screens on his computer, and he has a process for what he puts on each screen. Outlook on this one, presentations on this screen, spreadsheets on that one, and it's exactly to your design, your own personal needs, your own personal design. And a lot of companies, EY included, but over the pandemic, we're giving subsidies for at-home investment in technology and sit-stand desks and chairs and ergonomics, and they're investing in their people. And like the average was around 1,000, 1,500, I think, market-wide. And so over the last 2 years, you're investing in your own workspace. And to your point, when I go in, it's not to do heads down work that I can be more productive at home, as you mentioned earlier. So I'm going in to do all these other things. And so I work a lot with clients to determine what those things are for your employees, because it might be collaboration for this set of employees. It might be access to technology in another way for this set of employees. It might be whatever. So I think that's a key piece of it that a lot of us should be talking about with our clients and otherwise, is that thread of understanding of what are they coming back to, because what they have at home really is quite productive. So that's a really key piece of this.
Can I add on that though? I feel like also, speaking as a New York City resident, I feel like it also depends where you live. I think what we're really seeing, and I guess it also depends where you're at in your career in terms of what your home situation is like. I think between either younger individuals that maybe have roommates, or people that have families and kids running around in the background. I worked on my dining table for like 1.5 years, and I refused to I didn't want to have those extra screens. I don't have a spot I don't have an office in my apartment. And so I was actually very excited to go back to the office. So I think there will always be, at least in more urban environments, there will always be that mix of people that actually are really striving to get out of their small apartment and into a bigger space.
Good point.
Michael?
So there's a notion of the workplace as being a location, and then there's headspace. I've seen people who have come to the workplace and been absolutely disconnected from the conversations and meetings they're having. I've seen people working remotely being far more engaged and connected and present for the work that they're doing with others. So I think the workplace in that respect is in each one of us. It's what we bring to it, not just what we find when we get there. That's that point. On data can be your friend and it can be your enemy. And mining data is not much different than mining resources on Earth. You just don't drill indiscriminately. You have to do your homework. You have to figure out what questions are you trying to answer. And when it comes to the data ecosystem, I mean, in a single company, let alone society, in a person's life, real estate has data and multiple streams of it. HR has data and multiple streams of it. Technology, security, dining, travel, on we go. So who's aggregating all those sets of data? Do the systems communicate so that when you actually mine that data, you're actually getting the answers that you want about your workforce? And is a better conjunctive than but. I think the most valuable data of all is when a manager knows their people. You know, the pink elephant in the room right now is that, and where are the managers? Where are the leaders that are connected to their people? Rather than having a single entity in a company saying, what do these 50,000 people want and need? Well, where are the layers of management and leadership that are hired and in place to actually know their teams, how they're working, what they need? And I think there's a leapfrog thing. I think it begs the question, what are we as a society asking of our leadership and managers? Because that definition has to shift. Managers can no longer say, I have 1,000 people, I need 1,000 seats, and I need them in Midtown. Let me know when you're ready, and I'm happy to review the designs. Now it's got 1,000 people, but actually it's not that easy. They may be in 6 different locations, and they have different demographics and different backgrounds, and so managers have to be far more hands-on and thoughtful than they've ever been. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that you have folks like here in this panel studying all of this on top of organizations, but you need people in the organizations managing and leading the actual people we keep talking about in the tens and hundreds of thousands that they exist in work.
And being empowered to have a voice in that level of decision making.
How many times do you sit down to do a real estate strategy with a leader, and they ask you in very nice ways, what do my people want and need? Mm-hmm. Can you go ask them? You know,
sounds like you guys have all heard that a couple times at least.
It's humorous, and it's also because people are stretched, and managers have a lot to do, and their teams are bigger than ever, and they're global, and there's not enough, in my view, learning and development around the real skill sets that managers and leaders need to actually answer those questions based on organic, authentic, working with their teams day in, day out.
So there's one very significant factor here that has little to do with the pandemic, though I think the pandemic was a catalyst for people realizing that, and that is that computers are pervasive now. We talk about a data ecosystem. We live in a data ecosystem. Data is being collected about us all the time. And it's not only what is collected and what we can use, but it's also what we shouldn't do. Data privacy issues and things along those lines. I mean, I think people are realizing now, there was a time when you had to be in the office because maybe you had a mainframe computer and you had your terminals there and everything was a closed shop. Now with cloud computing, cloud, I always tell people, just think of it as other people's computers, but they are universally accessible. So there is this environment that we live in that you can get to your work from anywhere. Using your own personal devices. Even your phone connects you into your work environment. And I think that, with the pandemic and people being forced to work remotely, they realize that. And they realize, wait, I don't have to be in an office. And when we talk about, we say one size doesn't fit all. There are certain people, people that are early in their careers that need mentorship and coaching and things like that. And there are people that are passionate about what they do. And those are the people that I think you'll see returning to the office. We can't lose sight of the fact that a lot of office workers are working for a paycheck. And they are facilitating the things that they like to do in life. And that necessarily is not a worker who is keen on coming back into a work environment, into an office environment.
Yeah. I can say one. I mean, the one thing, an interesting perspective is I've lived in the city for 20 years. I just moved to Westport, Connecticut a couple weeks ago, okay? So I'm 40 years old, and all my neighbors are like a little older than me, and they're mid-40s. And I told them what I do, and I like became like the town celebrity because they're like dying for an opportunity to have a co-working, a space where they're not working from home, but yet they're not working from the city as well. Like they would love to have like an in-between, like driving 10 minutes, 15 minutes away, where they aren't driving an hour and a half in traffic and finding parking. So now everyone's like, hey, why don't you pick this building? Why don't you do this building? And I'm like, well, we don't really have that.
Crowdsourced development,
Exactly.
site selection, I love that.
So really, it's not that people are just, it's really, it boils down to the commute. And I think if you're driving, it's not about the office itself. Because everyone, not everyone, but most people want to have that social interaction. So my neighbor who tells me, I love working from home. It's the best thing ever that's ever happened to me. Well, I texted him in the middle of the day at 3 o'clock, and I said, hey, do you want to get a coffee? Before I could even see a response, I saw him out on the front lawn, be like, hey, I'm ready to get the coffee. Which tells me he was dying for that interaction outside of his home. But what he doesn't want to do is driving that 2 hours. So that's really what it boils down to in a nutshell.
I mean, we were dying for the same in Long Island, where I live, and we saw, traditionally co-working has built for dense urban populations, but a lot of people have spread out all of a sudden, and they may not be willing to come back.
Right.
Even those small businesses who moved their whole business online, and they moved down to Florida, or they moved to California, or they moved to Texas, and they're New York businesses. But in Long Island, we just had Saks Fifth Avenue just opened a Saks Works, which was so interesting in a prime retail location. I believe it was just a Lord & Taylor before that. It's brand new. And every day I pass it and I'm like, wow, this place is packed. And so, yeah, maybe we'll see some industrious pop up around these more what we used to call kind of tertiary markets and are now more, mainstream needs.
Yeah.
I love that. Can we plant that seed right now? So in terms of a hybrid working model, what are you guys seeing? I mean, we have the wait and see approach, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, where a lot of clients, from a consulting standpoint, they want to wait and see how things go. What we're waiting for, we're not sure, but we're waiting and seeing how it goes. But many, many companies are going after this hybrid model. So what does that mean? How are people defining it? Is there measurement for success? What do we think?
Deutsche Bank has officially gone with a 60-40 policy. So 60% remote, 40% in the office.
Wow, okay.
It varies a little bit globally. It's probably one of the more liberal work from home policies that among financial institutions.
Yeah.
We do keep track of the days that we're in. We try to do some collaboration. We're actually looking at some software that will help facilitate that to make sure that teams are co-located when they're in the office, and that people that interact with each other are there on the same days. But it seems to be well received, even though in some locations there's pushback even to being in the office 2 days.
Sure.
Yeah.
And like we said earlier, the hybrid workplace, that's a catchphrase now that's caught fire, has existed for a really long time. Companies are now trying to manage it and control it, and that's the difference. It's not the existence of it, it's how companies are responding to it. That's the big difference. But I don't know if it's, Mariel, on your list of provocative words to spur conversation here, but I'd love to talk about productivity. Let's talk about productivity metrics, and what does that mean? Because if you think about a person's productivity, it could be defined based on the work output, where they're working, are they showing up? But if you look at, the advent of the office itself through the 19th century to the 20th century, people were wildly productive. Humanity was wildly productive. And obesity is a crisis. Yeah. Why? Because people go and sit
for extended periods of time, commuting on trains, driving in cars, sitting in offices, sitting in cubicles. Obesity is a thing. Relationships within families strained, divorce rates.
Mental health.
So, you know, when you say, what's your productivity metric? Well, I'd say, well, let's define it first. Because productivity for a CEO is very different than my productivity in terms of how I look at my life and my health. And I think that this hybrid, everyone wants to move around and show up on each other's lawns for a cup of coffee, and that hyper-connectivity, it's because people are starved for it. But I also think these are the humans getting back to their roots. Humans were built to move. We were built to move cognitively. We were built to move physically. And when we don't do that for extended periods of time, it's really bad for us. So in terms of companies saying, we need you there, you know, for certain hours of the day, and we want you to take 4 hours to get there, mostly in all seated positions, it isn't good. So I think there's a balance to be struck, and people want to move, they want to be healthy, and I think productivity has to be defined differently.
Michael is a marathon runner, but he's also a poet, if you didn't catch on. I mean, he's an artist of words, truly. I always appreciate your perspective so much.
Yeah, I think like what I observed like in our, you know, occupancy world with many different clients we have is, in talking to them a little bit about hybrid working, there are a million definitions of it, right? So I think the reality is every company is probably trying to define their hybrid model. Some, I see like some companies, they have well-defined, like Deutsche Bank, it's a little bit more based on KPIs. So, and why definition is so important? Because you're measuring occupancy against the baseline, against an expectation, right? So by the time that you define something, you create an expectation. And if you know 60% of the time people will be at home, it's hard to expect that you're gonna have 100% occupancy, right? So it's not, like maximum 40%. And I think like a lot of companies are trying to define, but we see some companies wanting to take more control, like Mike said, and imposing some things and creating those KPIs like very loud and clear. But some other companies leaving very loose and subject to the unpredictability. Like you don't know what to expect. And I think that drives down to the technology the data needs to be collected now so you can build the patterns and really understand your space utilization to start making predictions more towards to the model you want to follow, as opposed to, you know, you coming with a firm definition. Most of the times you don't know the definition, like right. You don't know what to expect. It's going to take some time for you to collect that data. It's going to take some time for you to really understand your own space. Like, okay, I've gave the decision to my employees. It's all of their choice now. What to expect. Today, I don't know. 6 months from now, if you're collecting data, you're in a much better place to talk about your space.
Absolutely, and I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, the employees may think that they want to go for a certain strategy. They might come in once, twice, 3 days a week. But if you leave it up to them, what happens in a month when they have a life change, or they decide something, they don't feel like that anymore, or their commute is too long, or a million things. So we have to see for real what's actually going to happen.
Yeah, and I think from an operations standpoint, because I've been in the facilities management shoes before, it's a nightmare if you don't have that information, right? Because then you're heating and cooling and providing services to a space that it's mostly empty, and you're probably, it's, you know, ineffectiveness all over the place, not only in your physical space, but also in your utilities, in your operation. And then if the company is tied to sustainability ESG, which most of the companies now are, it doesn't matter how beautiful is your sustainability narrative if you're heating and cooling an empty house. Like, who wants that?
Absolutely.
Right, so it's kind of like, I think it drills down not only to the strategy part of the business, but also the operation part of the business. Right, so it has a bad effect if you have this unpredictability. You don't know what's coming, you don't know how to plan. How many snacks, you know, Justin is going to provide in his pantry? Some of the stuff is natural, it's perishable. Like, are we going to put all in the bin because nobody shows up? without those patterns, it's really, really hard for the operations team.
And we may do that for a while until we can understand really how it's going.
Yeah, so I think you covered operations and facilities management. I'll cover design.
Love it.
Again, I feel like one thing we're really figuring out how to do is how do you design for all these uncertainties? How do you design for the hybrid model? What does that look like? And I think kind of the key buzzwords we've heard over the last couple of years are flexibility and adaptability. So I think that's, can be looked at in a couple of different ways. We're looking at making sure that spaces are sort of hackable, I guess you can call it, via modular space types, prefabrication, demountable partitions. So something that, as simple as a movable wall that's a furniture partition that an employee can move around and position to collaborate better, to something a facilities management team over a weekend could swap out. We're doing a project right now that's got demountable partitions in these modular meeting room clusters, and the ability to take 2 phone rooms and combine them into a meeting room over a weekend, a larger meeting room, is something that was very attractive to this client because they don't know how people are going to use the space. Do they need those 2 phone rooms, or do they want a larger space if more people are coming into the office? And so giving and building in that adaptability into the design from the get-go is a really attractive model. And I think the other thing that we're really trying to incorporate a lot into our spaces is variety. Again, we don't know how people want to work, and frankly, like all of us at this panel probably work very different ways, and then want to work in different environments. So really looking at the design experience you have, and it's sort of multiple layers of posture, the furniture, but also the aesthetics of the space. We're looking at creating these alternate work zones and third places that have different a vibe and feel between light and dark, or organic and structured, and so driving people to work in an environment like their home that they feel a little more personal connection to, and can also just sit and collaborate in different ways. I think one of the spaces there that was a really good example is we have a inward-outward model. So 2 different spaces on a floor where more inward facing, if you want to be a little bit more private, maybe you're not as social of a person, but you still want to be within the office, having furniture that, let's say, has high back chairs, or furniture screens that kind of block your view from the high traffic zones. And then on the other space, it's a lot more outward facing. So it is actually, you're in the flow, you're watching the people who are coming and going from the space, and you're potentially collaborating together.
I have one more thread to add, because we talked about operations and FM and obviously the design. But I think the key element is the actual strategy. What are you trying to do? What are the outcomes that you're trying to drive? Like, how do you measure success? And is it flexibility? Absolutely could be that. Is it we want to better attract and retain employees for the future of work? It could be that. Is it that we actually want to optimize our portfolio? And so I think someone else said it earlier, but a lot of hybrid work is not new, right? It is here to stay, but it's not new. A lot of the clients I work with had hybrid employee base even pre-pandemic, but maybe they didn't have the data to understand really how prevalent it was until now. So they might have been 25% hybrid already, and then now they're like, wow, we're at 50%. But so I think that's key. I think the other element is, and what I'm sort of helping clients with is aligning leadership around how to do it and what it means. You might have one leader that, she herself or he himself doesn't even live near the HQ, to the earlier comment about sort of HQ. But then really getting the leadership aligned around what we want to do, how do we want to do it, what's our model around hybrid work, and what's our stance on hybrid work, is I think that's some of the challenges that I've seen in organizations is really sort of that alignment at the top. And I think maybe Mikey said this, is really leveraging managers and teams to understand how they might work differently and know that it might be different by team, by geography, sort of fill in the blank. So that's, I think, one element that, just to add from the strategy perspective, is the KPIs might need to start changing too as to how you measure the success.
Facilities, design, technology, strategy, all thoughtful,
and then
wonderful.
Each one you can layer multiples on top.
This workplace, this whole conversation, everything we do is a lightning rod for the bigger existential question: does my company get me? Do they understand me and those I care about and work with? And if they don't, I don't want to be there. I don't care where they have me working. If they don't get me and understand me, I want to go where they do. That's the question, because life is short. You want to work for people that get you. You want to work for people that understand you, that honor you. Because if they understand you, then they understand your journey, and they can help you on it. If they don't understand you, they're not going to be helpful with your journey. And so I think that all of these things poke at it. And if we were on a panel with HR folks, we'd be talking about compensation, learning and development, performance, promotion, etc. We could talk about diversity. We could talk about so many different aspects of what influences a person's experience working for an organization. But the number one question is, do they get me? Do they understand me? And if they do they honor me in how they employ me and use my resources and talent? That's it.
Okay. First off, we need to get this guy a podcast show. It's unbelievable. I'm inspired. The sense of do they get me? The answer is predominantly no, they don't. And that's not their fault, because I'll go back to the Coca-Cola example. If you're HR, you're doing benefits, you're doing payroll, you're doing all that stuff, but you've never really been in this sense before. So the question is, does Industrious, does the co-working, does the outsource provider get you? And the answer is yes. Like, we've been getting them for the past 10 years. So when we talk to these large companies, like McKinsey, Bain, whoever, we're saying it's not your fault that you don't get them. This is a new time. But why don't you just have hand this off to the expert who does get them? You do what you do best, let us do what we do best. And I think that's for kind of like coming out of this pandemic, the reason why companies like us are so excited is because we finally get to show these other companies what we do best. We are going to let their employees feel proud and excited to come to work. And you guys do what you guys do best, and we'll handle the other stuff. And I think that is kind of where we're seeing this shift. Because for the groups that are, like you're speaking about, like, do they get me? You're going to spend years and years and reading books and lectures, and like, it's just not going to come natural.
Exactly. And I think just a caveat to the technology, like, I think every technology solution out there is supposed to be private and it's supposed to be agnostic, right? So that's like, we come across in Virgin Sense, we're very proud to be 100% private by design, which means we don't get personal information. Like, we don't know, it's Mario, it's Fernanda, Mike, we don't know, right? So technology will not track people, and it's not supposed to track people. To Justin's point, is really the day-to-day and the way you operate.
Anybody else on that front? I do want to talk,
Well,
well, we're here, so.
I'm working for a European firm, very, very conscious of privacy. And when you say it doesn't track people, I'm very familiar with VergeSense. And they are more or less imaging, but there are other ways that people are tracked. And it's something we do have to be very careful about. When we start developing these metrics around return to the office, we have restrictions. You know, if somebody's in a fixed seat, we can't track that. We don't want to say that this individual is in the office on these days. So we do have to be very careful about that. You know, I personally have given up on privacy. In my personal life, you know, I research something on Amazon, I sit down to watch TV and I get commercials. And it's just, you know, how those connections are made, I'm no longer even concerned with, because it is just so prevalent. But you know, speaking from the IT side, one of our responsibilities is to respect privacy. You know, anything we do with collecting information around utilization, if it is specifically to locate a person, it has to be an opt-in type program.
Yeah, and Ruth, to your point, I think my point was in regards of one specific technology, right? I'm 100% with you. When you start combining data, it starts getting really powerful. That's how, you know, Google's and all of the search engines right there, they really pick up and learn, and their machine learning really gets it, like what you like, and offer you exactly what you need.
I have a colleague that is collects data in shopping malls, and they're restricted from collecting information about people. And he said what they did is they developed a program where they look at people's shoes. And from the shoes, they can tell if it's a man or a woman, they can tell the approximate age group, and they can develop all kinds of demographics just based on the shoes.
Wow.
So they avoid any data privacy issues by looking at people's shoes.
I love that. That's so interesting.
I love that. Yeah. And it's the amount of data that they need, right? So they just need demographics.
Exactly.
They don't need to understand your personal taste or anything like that. Yeah.
So a lot of companies are playing the waiting game, and I do want to talk about that because I think from a consulting standpoint, or just anybody that's working in this space, it's important to know, like, we're not at a standstill just because people want to wait and see what happens. So Amanda, how would you approach a client that wants to play the waiting game? How are you working with them?
I mean, I think we're really embracing pilots on a small scale. You don't have to pilot 100,000 square feet. You can pilot an individual meeting room with new technology. And so in starting to encourage and starting to gather some of the learnings from that will hopefully drive a bigger picture in terms of how clients are going to be changing their space or for purchasing new space over the coming years and how to design from it. And I feel like it also really helps to engage the employees as well. And so everyone feels like they have a little bit of a hand in the decision that's get made, as opposed to potentially prior to the pandemic where you had either a real estate team or the C-suite that was just making decisions. I think it also goes to the point of, maybe some of those individuals don't know their day-to-day employees, and so let's lean on them. Let's pilot things, let's test things. Let's be a little bit more scrappy these days, potentially, because
Love it. I really do.
Because we don't know. We don't know, and we need people to tell us is really the bottom line, I think.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, of course we have clients that are going in a similar direction, as Amanda mentioned, piloting, small spaces and seeing where they're landing. I think with us, it's a little tricky because back to what Dejana said about strategy, I think I challenge the customers a little bit to the whole strategy thing, although we're not doing the strategy, but we are contributing to their strategies. Okay, let's say you're going to do one floor out of your portfolio. You're going to get data about that floor. How that data is going to help you inform your strategy, right? So what are you really doing with one floor when you have a portfolio of 200 floors?
Sure.
How one floor data is going to help you to decide what happens with the other 199? It's not. We all know it's not. And for us, because data is collected over time, the time is now to start. We try to tell everybody, if you don't start today, you're only going to be good 6 months from now. That's the reality, right? So because you need that flow, you need the movement. And we hear a lot from our prospects, but I don't have anybody back in the office. And we say, I get it. We have a lot of customers that are in a similar situation, but what are you going to do when they start getting back to the office? You won't have that visibility if you don't have data.
Right.
Are you going to wait until that happens and then you're going to come to whether VerSense or any occupancy solution provider and say oh, can I get a solution for tomorrow? No, it takes time, right? So it's not something you're deploying from one day to another.
Well, if you have that underlying tech stack, then you are more able to play the waiting game.
Exactly.
Because your office is still working for you. It's still providing you that data and insights and hopefully some patterns for when you are ready to make a choice.
Exactly. And I think for us, the pilots are helpful and nice, but they don't sometimes, most of the times they don't represent anything.
Well, it depends, of course, on what the pilot is.
It's different from design.
If you want portfolio-wide data to set strategy, you can't be piloting this space and calling it, great insights. If you're piloting, conference room, meeting technology, from smaller suites.
Yeah, and I think also the reality is for those clients that are doing nothing right now, and even if they're implementing the data, that's great, but I feel like the pilot is a way to get them back into the water. You know what I mean?
Part of the process and feeling like they're part of the ultimate solution, hopefully.
Because we've had so many clients, I think that, as I think I alluded to earlier, had these false starts where they kept thinking, I can't tell you how many times they thought, this is the date, we're going back on this date, and then it just didn't happen. And then I think to your point, it becomes a panic of suddenly okay, this is really the time, it's gonna happen, people are really gonna come back, and it's you've got then 2 weeks to figure it out. I've been through a lot of those sort of panic, how can we make the space a little bit nicer, because we are actually having people back in the office, on Monday kind of thing. So I think it's really just, it's incremental. It's really, exposing, and I think it's the variety of types of new technology, new design, new spaces that can be piloted on a smaller scale to kind of also show employees that even though we don't have the answer right now, we're here, we're exploring it alongside you, we want your feedback, and this is going to drive really where we go as a company and as a employee experience over the next few years. Even if you don't make holistic changes right now, at least it shows that something is coming and that we're making an effort to actually address this.
Yeah. We've seen a lot of people make choices, whether to go to work, not go to work, stay at their job, not stay at their job based on their feelings and based on how included they feel. I mean, when we first met, we were talking about Spotify, we were talking about opening new offices, and how do you make people feel part of that process and build an emotional connection to what's happening. So these pilots, I mean, that's beautiful, and that's just makes a lot of sense.
And can I just add one other thing too? I think also the reality is if a company is not doing anything and they're just status quo, then yeah, people are just going to stay at home. Like you need a reason to actually drive people back to the office. So if you're actually trying to implement some change there, people might be like, oh, let me go and check out this new space type in the office and meet with my coworkers. But if it's all the exact same as it was before the pandemic, why are they coming back?
Right. I'll say something interesting. Yesterday was our highest attendance at our HQ, and I looked around and I go, why are you here today more than other days? Because we have Greek food today. And I said, but do you not have Greek food where you live? And they were like, oh, we do. I'm like, so why would you travel here for the Greek food? And then I think it became abundantly clear the Greek food was just kind of like the carrot to kind of get people here, but everyone here really wanted to be around each other as a result.
It's interesting. If you go to a coffee shop like near a college campus, like up at Columbia or something like that, and you go to these packed coffee houses, you know, these kids have apartments, they have places to live in dorm rooms and stuff like that. Sometimes you walk in and no one's talking to each other, yet they want to have coffee side by side. And that humans, even if they want to be together, doesn't mean they want to talk. They want to be silent, like a library, coffee shop. And that's a real dynamic in the workplace as well. And I think just in addition to productivity and pilots, another P word is purpose. You know, it's the larger the company you are with, and you're trying to wrestle this down, the more silos, the more lines of business, the more emerging businesses, fintech, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many different silos emerging and fluxing every day. As a real estate practitioner trying to solve riddles on the fly with all these disparate businesses, there are two things. One is there's a clarifying moment when you say, well, who's your client? No, who's the client where we drive the revenue? And it's a clarifying moment, because at that moment, you're getting back to the purpose, the reason that we're here. The second thing that is like an epiphany is that because it's so siloed, and I think all of us, you've all said it in different ways, you know, the real estate person or the designer or the project person or the co-working person is in some cases the only person talking to the leaders of all the different silos and piecing the puzzle together. And so you might say, well, wait a minute, this person has a team that's doing something very similar to you. Have you talked? Because your requirements are going to change depending on your connectivity within a company. And so gone are the days where real estate and those that do what we do are order takers. You become a soothsayer, and you begin to become an educator of the leaders of companies as to what's actually happening at the cross-section of the myriad businesses that they lead and manage. And that's, you know, that's a cheer for all the real estate people out there to exalt the role. But you have to lean into that role because now you have a responsibility to actually, there's a different output, not just a space you're building, but there's a very thoughtful strategy that you can assemble that no one else may have seen. Focus on your clients, where's the revenue being driven, that gives you purpose. And then number two, be the puzzle master within a company to figure out what the collective requirements look like and how to solve them.
I might change my LinkedIn title to soothsayer, so just FYI. But to be overly simplistic, as an analogy, going back to the waiting game piece, was you can wait passively and you can wait actively, right? So when you think about like sort of dating and those who are single, it's like you could be single at home, you could be single at a coffee shop, and you might meet someone, right? But you're still doing the same thing. You might be working. So anyway, it's super simplistic. But I think going back to what you mentioned about pilots and experimentation is how I see it as well. And so as an example, I have a client who said, we don't want to make any drastic decisions right now on our portfolio at this specific site. What we're going to do is sort of turn off floors, just go dark, and then observe for 6 months. And so I think there's been this historical tension, and I'm curious if you all agree, this historical tension around experience, which is a lot of what we're talking about today, workplace experience, employee experience, and the other side of it is sort of cost reduction, portfolio optimization, and sometimes there's tension between the two. And so, and what we see and what we feel in the space, and sort of what those practitioners or sort of portfolio managers are trying to do from a cost perspective. And so I say all that to say, experimentation right now is key, and I think this is a time to do it and not hold back, whether it's a floor, whether it's a building, or a certain geography or location, where you can try different things, measure it, and sort of evaluate, and then try again, and then sort of iterate on that over time and make some decisions. So I think I think now is the time for us to do that and for us to help our clients do that.
Yeah, and good point, Tijana. And one thing just to add to what Mike said, that we see in our edge as well is this ability to benchmark. And it's not benchmarking your company against your competitor. It's benchmarking your entire real estate portfolio to really understand once you get the data flow in, what are the areas that perform better than others and how people are using the space, and really trying to, instead of just counting people in and out, you're really trying to understand. You're really trying to go in and see, oh, this location of mine performs much better in terms of occupancy than this location. Why is that, right? So you start asking the questions. Then, to Mike's point, putting the puzzle together is never easy because your internal stakeholders are extremely diverse, right? And they have extremely different goals and purposes of a space. But really, when you benchmark your portfolio and you benchmark yourself against yourself, you really find the inefficiencies within your own thing. And then it drives conversations on and on.
Okay, so we've got 10 minutes? Okay, so, no, I think, we could keep going for quite a long time. This was already a really long roundtable, so thank you guys. And this is such a powerful group, so we could really get into it for quite a while. But a lot of what we do with Disrupt CRE these days is really focused on inspiring the next generation. And I don't think there are too many people that wake up and say, I want to be a workplace strategist when I grow up. If you do, reach out to me. I want to meet you. Right? We all do. But we need to be inspiring and building purpose for people to connect with us and aspire to spend their energy and talent in this space, solving for these big problems. And so I want to talk about just what is your best advice for people who are thinking about working, whether it's as an architect, design, facilities management, data, technology, just corporate real estate. I don't know if we dream about such things, but we will usher in a next generation, and we have a responsibility to kind of leave them with something, a point of connection. So does anyone want to give kind of their advice? It doesn't have to be super obvious.
Yeah, I think actually just sort of picking back on what I just said is experimentation. Experiment with your career, particularly if you're early into your career, you have a little bit more leverage and flexibility to do so. So try different things. LinkedIn is not to the spokesperson for it, but you leverage access to people, ask questions, ask for 15 minutes of time. I always say to sort of my younger cousins, just reach out to someone randomly, ask for 15 minutes, and ask them about what they do and how they got there. And I'm sure 90% of them will say, I didn't go to school for this, or this wasn't what I thought I would be doing, but somehow through conversations and visibility and exposure, I found myself doing this. So that's the advice I always give, is that you don't have to have the right answer right away, and what you do in school and your degree is great for so many things, but it doesn't mean that you're sort of locked in or into any specific decision or any specific path. Be flexible and ask a lot of questions. My friends are always like, Dijon, why do you ask so many questions? But that's how I learn, and that's how you really understand things.
So ask great questions, ask a lot of questions, and don't be afraid to admit when you don't know. That's a powerful thing.
I was going to say, we were joking that sort of our catchphrase was change is constant, and so I'm going to add on to that. I think embrace the change. Yes. We're actually at a really exciting point. I think everyone is over the pandemic fatigue, and I think people are looking at it in more of a negative way, and I think we need to shift that narrative and actually go toward the future and the fact that we're at a really huge time right now in all of our lives and in our careers and where workplace is going. And I think just kind of go with the flow and be able to be adaptable also in how you approach your career and approach how your everyday workplace is changing. And I think as long as you're able to do that, then I think you'll really be successful in wherever it leads you, I think.
Thank you, I love that.
I think my advice is just be mindful. We are entering a new era of workplace. So regardless of anybody that has 20, 30 years of experience, workplace going forward is totally different from everything we've done so far. And I think that puts the new generation in a really good position, right? Because it's kind of like everybody's coming in fresh, including me. We're learning, like Dijana said, we are still asking questions. We're still trying to figure out, we touched a little bit on hybrid work. What does that mean? Nobody knows. Future of work, nobody knows, right? So I think that the good advice is we're all interns here. We're all starting over. Like, be curious, ask questions. There are tons of resources out there today with the social media, with LinkedIn, companies like VergeSense. We are very proud to create marketing, amazing knowledge content. Yes, we do space occupancy, but we talk about workplace. We have great partners that teach us every day about what's out there and what's new. So really go there, because I think we're all starting fresh at this point.
And most technology companies, like you guys, have content teams at this point, and there's so much information that's available for free online, especially since the pandemic, that there's every opportunity to be self-educated every single day.
I think for me, what's interesting is, for the most part, some landlords have been doing the same thing over and over again, generation after generation. And I met this landlord a few months ago who's a third-generation landlord, and he said to me, I'm frightened that I'm not going to be able to have a business to give to my fourth generation. And it really stuck to me. And what it really said to me was that a lot of these people are so used to kind of going, autopilot. And now this new generation is coming in and kind of shifting that. And they're doing things a lot different. So for the new generation, this is a giant puzzle. Everyone's in it together, and they're figuring out for the first time. So even if you're right out of college or you're in your mid-50s, you're figuring this out together. And this is all new, and this is cool, and this is exciting, and this is kind of what gets me up every day.
Love it.
Now to the poet.
We've got 3 minutes.
So mine is very brief. Actually,
Okay.
I have to confess, it came from a fortune cookie.
I love that.
But it was the greatest advice, and that is, we don't fail, we succeed or we learn.
Ooh,
And I just thought it was great. I love the discussion around pilots and just make sure when you pilot, you quantify, you have measurements that you can take from it. The expression used to be fail fast, but as I said, I like that better, that we don't fail, we learn.
Learn
I think
fast.
that's beautiful. Michael.
Okay.
Take it, bring it on home.
I'm so glad I went before.
So for all the people that are in or coming into this big, expansive industry that touches every other industry, this industry touches every industry. So for those young people coming out of school, wherever they're coming from, the way in has many doors and windows. And what I found in my experience, and I probably suffer from this too, is that you want to come in through the front door. You want to knock, you want to ring the doorbell, and this is the way I'm going to go in. And this is what I was taught. But the front door might be locked to where you want to get into. Did you check the basement door? Did you check the windows on the front porch? Because one of them might be unlocked and you can climb through. You can get into this industry so many different ways, through so many different industries. And look, if you look at it this way, if a company has people that need shelter from the elements anywhere in the world, there's a need for real estate. There's a need for shelter from the storm. And that's what we provide, shelter from the storm. And sometimes the storms are internal to companies. And so I think, number one, check all the windows and doors to find your way in. Be humble about it. So if you have to go in through the chimney or the basement, so be it. Go in. Get in one way or the other to wherever you want to get to, and then learn from the people you're touching. If you're doing workplace or strategy for a pharmaceutical company, you might learn about a business that you didn't know about, and you might want to join that business. Or it might be for Coca-Cola, or it might be for a mining company. It could be for, you could be a park ranger. Everyone needs shelter. And so use the senses you have to absorb everything around you. And I think that, you spend a lot on your college education, more than I did. Use it. Use your brain. Use what your parents taught you, your families taught you, and trust your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, change course. Don't wait for someone to tell you that it doesn't feel right. Trust your instincts. Find your way in. Trust your instincts. And above all, no matter what you do, no matter what paths you travel in, keep your principles and core values with you at all times. Night and day, awake or asleep. because that will define you, and that is the most important part of your brand, regardless of what you do.
I resonate with so many things that you just said, as I'm sure all of you do, and whoever's watching. Be creative in your approach to entering this space. It can seem really intimidating. It can seem like there's this massive barrier to entry. But we need to be creative, we need to be resilient with our efforts, and we need to be patient. This is not an industry that moves overnight. These are not relationships that happen overnight. It's taken me many years to be able to sit next to all of you amazing people and have conversations like this and have an audience that's dedicated to watching content that we put on. It was not something that happened overnight, and it took a very, very long time. It took a lot of creativity to meet this gentleman and you and you and you and you and all of you who are watching. So I appreciate that so much. And core values, what makes you you? What are the principles that you stand behind? What are the ways that you're going to conduct yourself, not only just in business, but in relationships? What are your interpersonal skills? And that might be challenging right now, as people haven't been in person for quite a long time. Some of our next generation hasn't even had an in-person interview in years, maybe since they graduated college. Their internships are digital. So we are going to have a whole session on inspiring the next generation later this afternoon, starting at 2:30, and we're going to have some of our next generation in person, which is really exciting. Sustainability too, we're going to start sustainability shortly, so we didn't get too much into it, although I know from an office standpoint there is a lot to talk about. So I do want to, I think we're just about ending with our time right now, so I want to just say thank you guys so much for having this amazing talk, bearing with us for 90 minutes. If you guys are still watching live, thank you for bearing with us for 90 minutes. I hope we're going to be doing many more of these roundtables in different cities so we can connect more conversations in this fashion. So thank you guys. Thank all of you for watching, and hope to see you at the next roundtable later today.